Recorders. You either love them or you hate them, but regardless of your preference, you may have to teach them in your school. Recorders can be a really rewarding experience for both you and your students, but they can turn to disaster quickly. There's a lot of stumbling blocks that I faced as a teacher teaching recorder, and I'm here to share several ways that have helped me overcome them in the classroom. Hi, my name is Erin. I'm an elementary music teacher in Northern Indiana, and I'm also the teacher author behind From Do Re Mi to You. One of the biggest stumbling blocks that I have seen, especially in new teachers, is having a lack of consistent routines, procedures, and expectations. It's really easy for these to turn into noisemakers if the students don't know what to expect, or if those expectations change over time. So I said this in my last video, but before students enter the room, you need to know how students are going to get recorders out. What are they going to do with them once they have them? How will they know when to play and when not to play? And then how will they put them away? Now, there's not one right answer as to how to do those procedures. Personally, for me, my students, when we get recorders out, I choose 2 students to go to the back of the room. They call out names, the students collect their recorders and put them in sleep position, which I'll talk about in a minute. My students know when to play and when not to play based off of what I say and also what I do with my recorder. So for example, if my recorder is not in my hands, their recorder should not be in their hands either. Their recorder should be in sleep position, laying on top of its case on the floor. If my recorder is in chin position, so should theirs. That way we can say the note names and move our fingers without playing. If my recorder is in ready position, so should theirs. Now, I use this language regardless with xylophones and unpitched percussion. So for them, this is just a natural transition over to recorders. It's also really important to have consistent expectations. Are you going to have a warning system if students play when they're not supposed to play? And we know that sometimes accidents happen, but usually as a teacher, you can tell the difference between someone who is in ready position and just breathe too hard versus a student who's just not paying attention and is squawking. Personally, I enforce a 1 warning and off with your head, where they have to take off the mouthpiece for a few minutes and then just play with the body of the instrument. If they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, after a couple of minutes, I will gladly give them their mouthpiece back, but they don't have any more warnings left. Being consistent with your expectations will help prevent future problems. Number 2, students who have issues covering the holes. When it comes to playing recorders, we are asking a lot of our students. We're asking them to control their ear in a way that we've never asked them to do before, to use their tongue in ways we've never asked them to do before. And then we ask them to cover these tiny little holes where they may not even really feel that sensation. And that's on top of reading music, rhythm, and note names at the same time and being able to apply it. That's a lot to ask any elementary students. And some students really struggle with the dexterity and that lack of control to fully cover the holes. So here are some ways that have helped me help the students. Number 1, I tell my students to window wash their fingers. I tell them on a skyscraper when people wash the windows, just like this. And we can do the same thing with our fingers. If a student has a hole uncovered, I can just tap their fingers and they know, oh, I'm going to swipe my finger back and forth until I feel those holes. Likewise, especially in the beginning, I can tell students about recorder warts. Now, I tell them when they play, they don't need to squeeze down hard. As long as the hole is covered, they are fine. But if they're struggling with covering the holes, I can tell them to pinch hard, and then, I don't know if you can see it or not, it's going to leave a little indentation just for a minute or so. And that shows me and the students where their fingers are. If that hole is right in the middle of the finger, then they know that their finger is covering the hole. If their fingers are off, their recorder warts are going to be off to the side. Now, you can also consider helping specific students or full classes by covering some of the holes. If you start on B, A, or G, your thumb and 1 are always covered. And if you start on G and E like I do, thumb 1, 2, and 3 are always covered. So if you have some students who struggle with that dexterity to fully cover the holes, you can consider covering the holes for them temporarily. You can use things like washi tape, like this, and just take little pieces and cover the holes. Oh, goodness. There you go. Or you can use pieces of Velcro. I have one on the back as a thumb rest. And that way they have something tactile to feel. They know where their fingers go, but the Velcro or the washi tape is doing the work for them. And then they can just focus on E if they start on G and E, or they can focus on A and G. And they don't have to worry so much about these holes yet. When we get to those notes, then we peel those stickers back, and it's a big day. They're excited for that. You can consider doing this with specific students who need that extra support. But honestly, if you teach really big classes like I do, instead of just playing whack-a-mole with 35 fourth graders at once, trying to diagnose every little issue, you can do this with a full class as well, and then just take off the dots as needed. Another suggestion is once you take off the dots, if the students are still struggling to cover particular holes, oftentimes they just don't feel the holes, and having something raised around it can really help. You wouldn't be able to see it on this recorder, so I didn't do it ahead of time, but you can take a glue gun or hot glue gun and make a small ring around it, or do the same thing with Wiki sticks, and that makes a raised ring around the holes, and that's been really helpful for some of my students as well. Number 3 is students sounding too high. Now, this can be from several causes, but it's usually either the air or the fingers. So as students get ready to play a new note, I demonstrate what this note should sound like and then what it should not sound like. Because my philosophy is, if kids can hear what's wrong, they know how to fix it. So I ask students to notice their air, their thumb, and their first finger. If they sound higher than their neighbor, usually an octave higher if they're overblowing, they need to check their air and their thumb and their first finger. All 3 of those will cause you to jump an octave by accident. Now, I've also noticed that in the long run, having students start on the longer notes prevents overblowing in the first place. Because if I start my students on B and A and then G, students can overblow on B and A and be sharp and shrill, but it's not sharp enough for them to really know that it's them that's out of tune. That being said, if we start on G and E, if you overblow on G and E, you're going to pop that octave. Now, your students can hear if they are an octave higher than their neighbor. And again, if they can hear it, they can fix it. So I have found that just biting the bullet and starting on the lower notes helps prevent students sounding too high in the future. Number 4 is students struggling to read the music. Oftentimes we go way too fast in recorders. Again, we're asking them to control the air, their tongue, their fingers, and then reading rhythm and note names at the same time to make this work. That's a lot to ask. So if students are struggling to read music, take it back a few steps. And honestly, if you are just starting out, I'm going to challenge you. That first day or two, just start with the mouthpiece. That's what we do in beginning band and orchestra, right? We don't play the entire violin on day 1. So start with just the mouthpiece, seal the bottom, and use warm air. If you overblow, it's going to sound really high. And again, if students can hear it, they can fix it. Once they can control their air and their tongue and know how to articulate, then you can put it together. You can start with B, A, and G, or G and E. But again, just teach it by rote. Get them used to moving their fingers and getting that control under their belt. And then once they can control their air, their tongue, and their fingers, then you can introduce written notation. Take it step by step. Start with short patterns, flashcards, simple 4-measure songs. Use a lot of visual aids. And then you can start to apply it to longer pieces. And number 5, last but not least, not having the right curriculum or resources to teach your students. Recorders can be such a fulfilling experience, but if we don't have the right tools and methods to really teach elementary students who are not the same as middle school students, it can be a really frustrating experience for anyone, both teachers and students alike. And that's where my Joyful Noise Recorder curriculum comes in. This is an ORF-based curriculum that starts on G and E and works its way up through B, A, G, E, and D. And what I love about it is that the teaching process is written out for you. We go through a method starting with chanting the rhythms, saying the note names, looking for patterns, playing it on our chin, breaking it down to different parts before we put it together. That step-by-step process will help ensure that your students are successful in the end. What I also love about Joyful Noise is that it is full of ORF extensions, optional activities, accompaniment tracks, a songbook, and there's so much more included. So if you are looking for a recorder curriculum to best serve your students and your needs, you can check the link down below. I hope these tips were helpful for you, and if you have any questions about teaching recorders, please shoot me a message. I would love to answer your questions. And as always, hit subscribe, like, the whole shebang, and happy musicking.